Namasri Yatirajaya Vivekananda Sure Satchit Sukha Swarupaya Swamine Tapaharine. We are all celebrating the 161st birth anniversary of Swami Vivekananda according to the Indian calendar. Because if we follow the English calendar, he was born on 12th January, but the date changes according to the Indian calendar. Every year the date changes, and this year it has fallen on 14th of January. So the topic that we had announced, most of you are on Zoom, some of you are on YouTube, was Swami Vivekananda in England. I specifically chose this topic because a few days ago on 12th January, which is also celebrated as the National Youth Day in India, especially because that was announced in 1984 when the government of India thought that this birthday of Swami Vivekananda, the 12th January, which is according to the English calendar, should be celebrated as a National Youth Day. We have National Children's Day, we have Father's Day, there's so many days, but there was no Youth Day. And the government decided in 84 for a specific reason, because Swami Vivekananda represented the eternal youth, not only of India, but the entire world. But obviously, because it is a national holiday, it is celebrated only in India. But our Indian High Commissions all over the world, for the last, say, few years, they have been instructed it is mandatory for them to celebrate this 12th January as well as a National Youth Day in their respective embassies in different countries of the world. So there was a meeting and the same topic was discussed in our Nehru Center, which is part of the Indian High Commission. And that was a conversation. It was a conversation between the director of the Nehru Center, Mr. Amish Tripathi, who is a famous novelist. He has several bestsellers to his name. Most of these novels are based on Indian myths and great historical characters. So he asked a few questions on the life and message of Swami Vivekananda and its relevance, especially not specifically for England, but to the Western world. What is its relevance? So this is a big question, because all of us know, though we celebrate him as a national hero, he has very clearly mentioned in many places, in letters as well as in his speeches, that he does not belong to India alone. He said patriotism is something which was natural to him, but at the same time it was not a kind of patriotism which is normally understood, that I love my nation, but that implies somehow that I don't have that kind of affinity for other nations. So there's a boundary, and one's attitude towards life is not universal. It's not bad to be a nationalist, but Swami Vivekananda's nationalism sprung from the fact that he believed that the survival of India was necessary because it has a great role to play. It has a great contribution to make. So he generalized it by saying that if you divide all the civilizations of the world into three major streams, the three different streams, that was his way of classification, not according to nations, but according to the influence three different major civilizations had on the entire world. And what we are today believed in those days also. Now things are much, you can understand its manifestation now much better than 125 years ago when he came to England, because England was practically uh, industrial power to reckon with, and its influence was felt in several nations which England had colonized. So naturally, in those days when Swami Vivekananda visited England, we were still under the British rule. And Britain was ruling many other colonies as well. And the influence of English was, they say there were about 400 million people in those days, which came directly or indirectly under the colonial rule of the British. So English was a medium through which the highest thoughts of Vedanta or Hinduism were presented by Swamiji on the Swami Vivekananda, first in Chicago, where Parliament of Religions was held, and later on he decided to come to London. Of course, he came to Paris, and from Paris he was invited by two of his would-be disciples. One was Edward Sturdy, the other disciple was Miss Henrietta Muller, who was a women's activist. Maybe you are aware, in those days women were struggling here to even vote. They did not have voting rights. Even America did not have. And one of the ladies who organized a program in Hyde Park, near Hyde Park, where she lived, it is now known as Chancellor's House. That lady, strangely, was an American lady who was fighting for women's rights, especially voting rights, because it's only in 1918 and much later in 1928 that women got a chance. 1918 they were allowed to vote, but only 30, those who are 30 and above and educated. So it was, the gender equality was not there. When Swami Vivekananda came here, Henrietta Muller was one of the women, apart from Emily Pankhurst, who started a movement demanding rights for women to vote, to have some say in the democratic setup or the parliamentary system, the parliamentary monarchy that was being practiced. So they wanted, and ultimately they all succeeded. But this period was just before that, when the movement had just started, not only in America, but also in England and other countries of Europe. And this lady who invited Swami Vivekananda to her house in the Chancellor's house, she was married to a British gentleman who belonged to one of the royal families, a distant relative. She was the first woman to stand for elections to be a candidate for the president of USA. But she could stand for the election, but she could not vote. That was how strange it was in those days. In America, which was considered by many, along with England, to be one of the advanced, so-called modern civilizations. So that was the condition. So we have to remember the background. When Swami Vivekananda came to England, these movements were going on. There were other movements where common people also were demanding. Of course, they got the right, men got the right to vote, irrespective of their class, royalty, or even the common man got a chance to vote and have a say in the democratic system. But women were still struggling. So this lady, Henrietta Muller, and Edward Sturdy, who was also influenced by Hindu thought. In fact, he was, you may say, he was almost like a practicing Hindu, because he did many things which he thought are the ideals of Hinduism. Hinduism is a very vast religion, and we know some people say if you are vegetarian, then only you are a Hindu. So he was one of them who believed in certain things in a very, very dogmatic way. But he had his own ideas what Hinduism is and the type of Hinduism he wanted to follow. So he was impressed. He went to India, stayed there for some time, and also lived with one of the brother monks of Swami Vivekananda in the Himalayas, and he was deeply impressed by his life. And then he heard for the first time that one of his Guru Bhais, that is one of his brother disciples, is in America and he might visit England. So when he came back to England, he wrote a letter to Swami Vivekananda, who was in America in those days, to explore the possibility of coming and spending some time in England, especially London, where he wanted. He was living in Caversham in Reading in those days, though his original ancestral house was in Devon. But he was renting a house. He was staying in a rented house in Caversham. So that is the first place in 1895 that Swami Vivekananda happened to come visit. Before that, he was in Paris for some time and to attend a function. And from there, he came in August 1895 for the first time. And he spent a few months. So his first contact, physical contact with England, was in September 1895 for a few months. Then he went back to America because he was there since 9/11, that is September 11, 1893. So 2 years had already passed and he was crisscrossing the whole country and giving talks which were organized by his American disciples. So he felt very deeply that my mission will be incomplete if I don't put these ideas, these wonderful universal ideas, in London, and especially the whole of England, especially London, because that was the center through which ideas could spread all over the British Empire. And many countries would benefit because English was a medium of language which was a common way of communication between peoples who lived in this 400 million people, these peoples of these different countries. They were English was the ideal medium. So Vivekananda decided to come to England from Paris, and as he had invited him, he stayed in Caversham for a few weeks. But when he was there, he found that Sturdy had his own agenda. He was deeply impressed by Narada Bhakti Sutras and some texts. So he had his own axe to grind. He was not so keen to spread the message of Vedanta all over England. His main idea was, if Swamiji comes and stays with me, can help me with some translations, I will publish some books in my own name. And that's what he did for a few weeks, 6 weeks. He helped him translate the Narada Bhakti Sutra, though he has acknowledged the help he got, but basically he has published it in his own name. And then Swamiji found, though he was deeply interested in spirituality and Indian religion as well as Indian thoughts, ideas, his focus was more academic. And Swamiji had no time to waste. He had very little time. He knew he wouldn't live long. In fact, he died before he reached age 40. And he was almost 30, I think he was 31 or 32 at that time, 1895. Passed away in 1902. So he was in a hurry because he knew that his time is short and he had so many things to do. Something which took several decades for an ordinary person, he was trying to accomplish. Sow the seeds of universal religion as preached by his master, wherever you could, in the short time he knew he had. So he was in a hurry, and so he told Sturdy that, see, I have to be if I stay in this corner of England, Reading, I will not be able to spread the message of this universal message. It would be better if we shift to London. So that's why when they got a chance, they shifted to a place in Pimlico, which is known as St. George's Drive. That house is still there. There's a blue plaque. It's a British heritage site. And it was in this very house that he used to hold parlor meetings, because he was unknown in this country. And obviously we were colonized, so nobody is going to listen to somebody who is already colonized. And you come from a country which they are ruling. But he was surprised by some of the genuine souls who were searching for some deep universal truth. They did not have narrow political agendas, political or cultural and civilizational agendas, or they did not have that kind of superiority complex. They were willing to learn. So Swami Vivekananda, when he first met, one of the few ideas which Sister Nivedita, who was one of his foremost disciples, who was in those days known as Margaret Noble, she made a note of all the parlor talks and some notes from her memory she reproduced. Unfortunately, though one of his disciples, English disciples, but he met him in America, he was employed as a steno, he could take down notes very quickly. He had a capacity of recording 200 words per minute. He was a wonderful steno, and he followed Swamiji everywhere. So though he came to this country, he thought the parlor talks are not so important. Or even if they were important, whatever notes he had prepared based on the talks, he shared it with a friend who unfortunately lost it. They were meant for publication in America, but we have lost all that. But Nivedita's memory was so strong that even after his passing away in somewhere, I think just before 1905 or 6, she tried to recollect what she heard. The inspiration she got, it's not just the ideas because she was a great scholar or a great academician and a teacher. So she already was an empowered woman and very much familiar with all the different philosophies, including Buddhism. Not so much Hinduism, but through theosophy, through Annie Besant, she knew some ideas. But that was just intellectual knowledge, academic knowledge, which does not mean anything in spiritual life. So for her, Vivekananda's words came as a shock. That here was a person who speaks based on experience, based on his own personal experience, not by quoting from different books, which is considered as second-hand knowledge. And this he had learned from his great master, Sri Ramakrishna. When somebody praised him, because he was a graduate in those days, he was a graduate of Presidency Scottish Church College in Kolkata, and by the standards that were prevailing in those days, he was a very qualified person. But even he felt like a child, like a pygmy in front of Sri Ramakrishna. He said, my master never went to school, but his wisdom was more lofty than all the scholars put together, because ours was second-hand knowledge. Second-hand knowledge we just reproduce. That is one of the problems of modern education. That's what he felt. He said, I had to unlearn many things before I could understand or learn something from my master, because he was the original person. He never shared borrowed thoughts. He got all his ideas, all his concepts, all his teachings. They came from nature directly, the university of nature, as he said. And because he had access to this direct knowledge, which is the Indian tradition. If you propound some idea, whether it is Gita, Upanishad, Vedanta, you see everywhere, these are not ordinary thoughts that some author has compiled or maybe thought and then written and then shared. That is second-hand knowledge. That is what university people do. But he said, I felt when I met my master that my knowledge was very insignificant compared to his. But every day he was bombarded with some kind of experiential knowledge which he was seeking. He was not happy to just use religious words, spiritual words, and just as a parrot repeats that the different concepts of religion which many pundits and scholars repeat. He was not satisfied. He went to almost every scholar whom he met, the Brahmo leaders. He went to different sects of India and asked them one question: have you realized God, or have you realized that reality or the spirit about which you are talking? And if you have realized it, if I have to believe you, can you show that reality to me? Can you share that experience with me? So this was the approach of Swami Vivekananda. He was not satisfied because he had enough university education. He had enough. He was a student of philosophy. He studied both Western as well as Eastern philosophers and scriptures, everything. But somehow he was eager to have a direct experience. So that is why he came to Sri Ramakrishna, and for the first time somebody told him, assured him that not only I have experienced reality or God, but I can show, I can make you experience the same. This was the first time, including the great Brahmo leaders whom he was following, Devendranath Tagore and all those people whom he asked the same question, they were just avoiding. When he was asked, have you seen God? They would just change the topic because they could describe some ideas about God, but who had the direct experience? Very few. And Sri Ramakrishna was one of them. So that is why when she says, Nivedita says, when he came to England, some of the people, the parlor meeting was very small. I mean, hardly 20 to 30 people came because it was a small room. St. George's Drive, you see that house now. It was rented by Edward Sturdy because he was keen to stay in London so that more people can benefit from these talks. It's only later when he had crowds which sometimes were more than 1,000 in the Princess Hall, which is presently, that building is still there, but it is used as an office now. The Society of Painters in Watercolors, Royal Society of Painters in Watercolors. It is still there near Westminster. And in that building there was a big hall, Princess Hall, which sometimes they hired. When the parlor meetings became, there was no place for more people, they decided to hold these classes in this Princess Hall. And that is where he gave some of the best talks. Fortunately, those are recorded. But these parlor talks, though they were recorded, it was given to Josephine MacLeod, who was an English American disciple, for her safekeeping, but destiny, it's our bad luck that it was lost. So there are many things which are missing, but Nivedita gives us some key ideas which she heard. The ideas were so strong that she could not forget it even after 10 years. And all the new ideas which she got from Swamiji, if we just classify them, we'll find certain things which just struck her as something very new, though she had read the books. But for her, especially with her Wesleyan background, her father was a priest in one of the churches in Torrington. And she was educated. I mean, she belonged to a family who were priests. by profession. My father was a priest. And she had education, but she was very liberal because she had read other people, Bertrand Russell and other scholars, modern thinkers who did not agree everything what the church said. So they were questioning many things. There were intellectuals who had a movement had already started. And one statistic says that 40%, even in those days, of the people preferred not to call themselves as practicing one particular religion or the other. They did not say they are atheists, but they refused to associate themselves with any particular organized religion. That is why for the first time, Swami Vivekananda told, when Nivedita heard from his lips that it is good to be born in a church, but it is terrible to die there. I mean, he was not just referring to the church. He was referring to our temples. He was referring to mosques. He was referring to all the different organized places of worship. The meaning which he later understood was that religion is realization. You may need these things to prop you up in the beginning, but one should not be stuck with these rituals, because throughout the world, if you see, take up any religion, the founder has a message. The founder comes with a message. Christ comes with a message. Buddha comes with a message. Krishna comes with a message. Every of these great spiritual personalities have come with a message, which was taken up by their successive disciples, generation of disciples. And that is how a organization or a movement or a sect gathered around that personality. And it is a matter of, if you see in history, always the trend is to dilute that message to suit society. So Swami Vivekananda, that struck her very much, Nivedita, when Swamiji said, society has to listen to truth. Truth will never bow down before society. If that happens, then that truth or that the whole ideas of those religions, they will first they will get diluted and then slowly they will vanish. That's why he says it is terrible to die there. That means as you grow, you may be born with simple ideas which are necessary, simple ritualistic ideas. But as you grow in your spiritual life, these things have to be discarded for some higher idea. And Swamiji never said we are traveling from error to truth. He said it's always you're traveling from a lower truth to higher truth. So different modes of worship that you see in the world, which is causing a lot of clash because we are so exclusive in our approach to spiritual life. We think ours is the only path. So he had seen it in India, he had seen it more in the West, where sects were quarreling with each other. In fact, most of the wars that have taken place, that's why many of the modern intellectuals, they just wanted to disassociate themselves from organized religion, because they thought religion is the reason why these wars are taking place. All the crusades, if you see the whole history, it's a very bloody history where people have been killed because of their faith, not because of anything else, but just because of they follow one faith, which is not my faith, your faith and my faith. This was the issue, or this was the major problem which led, of course, there were economic considerations. There was wealth, there was grabbing of land and other reasons. But religion also, the religion as it was practiced in those days, or throughout history, people were fed up. The First World War, the Second World War, this happened much later. But when Swami Vivekananda came, there were so many wars already which had taken place, whether it is between Protestants and Roman Catholics or between different sects within one religion. Even in Hindus, when Sri Ramakrishna came, they say it was like a bonfire. Every sect within Hinduism was trying to establish its superiority, spread its ideas, and say that my religion or my path is the only path. So Sri Ramakrishna had to tell them, From his own experience, he practiced all these paths. He said diversity is not a problem. You follow as many people are there, we can have so many religions. It's not a big issue. But don't say my religion alone is true and yours is false. So one has to understand the atmosphere which was prevailing in England at that time when Vivekananda came. But of course, he was fortunate. He did not face the same kind of opposition he had to face in America. In America was, hounded by the people belonging to organized religion. They said this man with his liberal ideas will close down our shops. Just as Jesus did. When Jesus went, when money changers were doing all sorts of business in the synagogue, he said, you have turned my father's house into a den of thieves. That is the language these people use because they see for themselves what goes on in the name of religion. So he came in that kind of atmosphere, and that situation, not only in America, but when he traveled through Europe and also came to England, these were the issues. But he, according to his own submission, he says England was far more liberal and I found it very easy to spread these universal ideas, though they did not become public, to a selected group of people who later on did some wonderful work, not only in England but also in India, mainly in India. The English disciples, the contribution of the English disciples is something which we have to remember today. Swami Vivekananda's message, like Nivedita sacrificed her whole life. She left her own country, went and sacrificed her life and died for Swami Vivekananda's mission of educating women. He said, compared to your women, our women are suffering so much. Here, they may be denied certain things. There is gender inequality, but in India, they don't even have basic education so that they can at least fight for their rights. So he was very keen that she helped. Margaret Noble, who was a teacher herself and who had started a school in Wimbledon, to go to India. And at one call, she agrees to go in 1898, she goes. And then in 1910, she passes away in Darjeeling, trying her best. It was difficult to work even in India. There were so many obstacles. But this was the inspiration she got, because she felt that the message which I got from her guru, that is Vivekananda, it began in the parlor meeting, but then she heard him. She says, unfortunately, those were the best days when there were small groups. But when he was speaking in a large gathering, it was difficult to approach him. So he says, except for a few meetings where I really got the inspiration. So one of the ideas, she has listed many ideas. One of the ideas, she says, the basic difference, Swamiji told her, the basic difference is, in India, the ideal is freedom of the soul, which is known as mukti. Not only in Hinduism, but Buddhism, Jainism, everybody believes in moksha, mukti, nirvana. The names may be different. But the goal of every human life is to be free from all types of bondage. So a Hindu or a Oriental, a person born in an Oriental religion will give everything for this kind of freedom. He wants freedom at any cost. But he says in the West, religion is equated with service of humanity, compassion. So that is how people understood the Semitic religions. To serve man, to serve the Lord or maybe to serve man because they are creations of God. So with compassion we should be And that is how they interpreted the messages of the prophets like Moses, the Jews who follow Moses, then Christ, and other religions, Semitic religions. So the ideal of service of humanity as a charity, as something which we should do. If we love God, we love His creation and we serve that. But in India, the ideal was freedom of the soul. You have to be compassionate, you have to be, but the goal is not just serving just because they are the children of God. The goal is that by service, by serving the spirit in man or spirit in human beings, you get your own freedom. So that's why Swami Vivekananda gave a wonderful slogan or motto for Ramakrishna Mission when he said, Atmano mokshartam jagat hitaya cha. That's a Sanskrit verse. Atmano mokshartam means for the freedom of one's own soul. So he combined the Eastern ideal of freedom and the Western ideal of service. Jagat hitaya cha means for the welfare of the world. So can we not combine these two ideals? That is a wonderful idea he gave, and Nivedita understood it in one of the parlor talks. So he said, can we not combine? Let service be worship of the spirit in man. As Jesus said, God is spirit and should be worshipped as spirit. God is spirit, and the kingdom of God or the kingdom of the spirit is within you. It's not somewhere in heaven. Somewhere heaven is not outside, it is inside. So that idea, that Vedantic idea of freedom of the soul, of the individual soul, every personality is trying to reach some kind of fulfillment. First he tries with wealth, with material wealth. He feels no matter how much money I have, still there is some unfulfilled desires. So then he tries something else. He tries to work for name and fame. Maybe he uses that wealth to get some kind of name and fame for himself. He thinks he will be free when he does that. First he thinks he can be free from poverty by earning money. Then he thinks he can be free from this limitation that he feels or sense of unfulfillment he feels by doing some charity, by being known as a great person. So there are different levels at which a man seeks freedom. They're all urges to be free. We want to be free from poverty. We want to be free from many things which we think are limiting us as a human being. But Vedanta says that freedom will come only when you are totally free from all bondage of matter. That is why Jesus famously said, mine is a religion of the spirit. You can't have God and mammon at the same time. By mammon he meant the attitude that, the worldly prosperity. So that's why many of his disciples who wanted to follow him, he said some of them were very rich disciples. So there's a beautiful verse. Most of his disciples were fishermen. And they used to come, they just followed him, and some of them became great saints. But a few of them, they loved their money more than Jesus. Though they were influenced by him, they were impressed. He said, can you leave everything behind and come with me? I will show you the way to the kingdom of heaven. What he meant was, I'll show you that divinity. But they were hesitating, and Jesus remarked to some of his disciples, see, he loves mammon more than God. If he had really loved God, he would have come like you people. Anyway, that is the core message which Swamiji spoke, and that impressed Nivedita, because here he spoke of renunciation as the basis of all religions. For the first time, somebody told the Christians, organized Christians, that you go back to Christ. I have not come here to convert you to Hinduism or any other religion or Vedanta. The central message of that impressed Nivedita. And he told them in one of the parlor meetings that the central message of all religions is renunciation, whether it is Christianity, if you go to the original teachings. So once he was being challenged, questioned. Then he said, you people are not Christians. You go back to Christ. Go back to his original teachings. Then you will understand what he came to preach. He didn't come to preach all these dogmas and other things. He came to preach freedom. He came to preach the kingdom of spirit, which he attained. And he wanted all his followers to attain. When he was challenged, when he was crucified, one of the arguments was he's claiming himself to be a king. But unfortunately, they did not understand. The Roman emperor, who listening to these different jealous people, they crucified him because they said he's proclaiming himself as a king. But what was that kingdom? That kingdom of was not the wealth which they sought. The Roman empires were afraid that this person is so popular that perhaps they may lose their power. So they could not understand the message that the kingdom of heaven, or the kingdom which he referred to. And when he was asked, he said, yes, I am the king. I am the king of the kingdom of spirit, because that's what he was. So also Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda said, that is the message I am bringing to you, as I learned from my master, for whom this world meant nothing. And that is the core of religion. It may be we are not ready to reach that level and attain to that height as the master did. My master means Sri Ramakrishna. But what I saw in him, I am telling you. And the same message I see in all the prophets, whether it is Buddha, Christ, or Ramakrishna, or Krishna, or any of these great prophets. So this impressed Sister Nivedita. This is how we can reconcile, by considering or by taking up all the common messages from these great prophets and harmonizing the ideal of the East and West. Then I was mentioning about the three civilizations. In fact, some women once asked him, in fact, this was when these English disciples with Josephine MacLeod though she was Scottish, she was American, and four of them were traveling on a Amarnath Yatra in Kashmir. In those days, Kashmir was, everything was part of India. So there, when they were walking, suddenly Swami Vivekananda mentioned some things which was a revelation to these women. Nivedita was, of course, there. Sister Nivedita and other women, English women. Mrs. Xavier was there. So he said, in a very prophetic way, he said, three streams of thought have influenced the whole world. And what we are today is the influence of these three basic streams of thought. So first, he said, is the Greek civilization. What has Greece given us? Given the whole world, in fact. The influence of Greece, though you may not see it in Greece right now. Greece is not such a powerful country as many other countries. But in those days, when the Greek civilization was at its height, before the Roman civilization, the Greeks, the Aristotle and all those people, what did they give to the world? And how did they change the whole civilization? That was through arts and culture. Arts and sciences, sorry, not culture. So he says their contribution was arts and sciences, and that has spread all over the world. Wherever you see, maybe it was developed in other countries of Europe and America and even now India, China and all these countries, but basically the idea of a scientific approach to life, a rational approach to life, we have to acknowledge the contribution of the Greeks. So he says on one side is the Greek civilization. The second civilization is the Roman civilization. So he says, what is Rome's contribution? Italy, Rome was the center of the Roman Empire. That's why we call it Roman Empire. And much of the world before the British conquered many other colonies, it was Rome who was ruling practically many countries of Europe. So what did Rome do? What did it contribute? to the world. He says it is politics and administration. They were very good administration, not so much good in arts and sciences, but they were very good administrators. And Vivekananda told these women that all the democracy and all the different systems of government and order in society, social systems, they are all born from this power of administration and controlling different peoples, organizing them, that organizing capacity of the Romans, with the help of which they ruled, that political ideas, political systems, not the religious. Rome was later on conquered by Christianity, Christian in ideas. That is how Vatican was formed. But before that, they were more Roman ideas spread all over the world in how to have a democratic setup, how to have parliaments, how to decide, how to rule the people. So all these things, it is a politics and administration is a contribution of the Roman civilization. So Swamiji says 3 civilizations, and the third is Oriental or Indian. So what has India got to contribute? This also Sister Nivedita has recorded, because she heard it herself when they were walking. Casually would, whatever she remembered, she has noted in this wonderful book, The Master as I Saw Him. So she says, the third force or the third major contribution to civilization was by the Oriental or the Indian ideal, and that is spirituality. Spirituality, renunciation, and the idea that spirit should dominate matter, not the other way around. Otherwise you will be miserable. Whether it is Buddha, whether it is Mahavira Jain movement, or even Christianity, which has a lot of Eastern influence, because Palestine, Bethlehem and all those places, they were influenced by this. There was definitely the Jewish influence and the Zoroastrian influence, but at the same time, these Oriental ideas had traveled long before Christ was born to these parts. So naturally, he says the Oriental idea of the superiority of spirit over matter, superiority of consciousness over matter, was the Indian contribution. But he said the present need is to merge all these 3. We can't say the Indian message alone will save the world. It is one contribution, but there are other contributions. And at different levels of human activity, we need all the 3. And that is what the world is today. Everywhere you see the influence of science and culture and arts, everywhere. No country can live without science. No country can live without governments, parliaments and all those things. So that is the Roman contribution. But then he said, along with these great contributions, they brought several defects for which whole humanity is suffering. He says, in trying to develop politics and administration, the Roman people became very cruel. Their only intention was to somehow grab territory, expand the empire. That expansionist ideas, he said that cruelty, not caring as long as your empire expands, in the name of nationality, in the name of conquering other nations, that cruelty was a negative thing because of which the Roman Empire collapsed. So he said, when there is too much of negativity, the positive side was good, the politics and administration, how to look after the citizens. but the negative side of each of these civilizations brought their downfall. So what brought the downfall of the Greek civilization? So he said the Greek civilization contributed arts, sciences and culture to the entire world. But its defect, or you can say the negative side of the Greek culture, which brought about its downfall, was too much of worldliness, too much of desire for enjoyment. Because when you develop arts, sciences, when you become prosperous, You have to put, there are some elements which should be used to put these ideals in check. If it is used in a wrong way, that same wealth, that same desire for progress can be a danger for society. So he says their glory was in developing these arts and sciences, but at the same time, their defect was too much of desire for enjoyment, worldly enjoyment. So that is why Swamiji says that is where our Vedanta comes in, and the Oriental contribution, though it is spirituality, unfortunately, there is one defect with our Indian civilization as well, and that is impracticality. So what does he mean by impracticality? Not to understand the true spirit of religion and get bogged down by rituals. That is, again and again he was afraid that any religious revival in India should be a spiritual revival. He said, he tells Nivedita a wonderful message. Unification in India should be a unification of the spiritual forces, not political forces, or not a unification of some rituals, some pujas, and hundreds of rituals were created. And that creates a lot of confusion in the minds of people. They may have good intentions, but they said, what should I do? Why everyone says this is the best ritual, do this, do that, and then in the end they just discard everything. So Swamiji gave one simple word for this defect: impracticality. Theoretically, we had one of the best spiritual ideas in the world, universal, spiritual, which can really elevate and which is necessary for the whole world. But unfortunately, it is the impracticality which led to our downfall. Instead, it was not because of religion, as the British government and the English education taught us, that because you were religious, you did not develop. See, we became so powerful. Swamiji says, no, it was Indian impracticality. Because you started quarreling amongst yourselves, not understanding the true spirit of Krishna or Rama and all the great spiritual personalities who had come over a period of time. Every time we needed, we had an avatara. And there's so much of spiritual literature, but it got bogged down in so many impractical rituals and other things, which brought down the utility of the religion or the utility of spirituality was not not properly used in India. And as a result, we fell down, or not only fell, we suffered politically, we suffered one of the wealthiest nations. Because the Greek ideas, the Roman ideas, they were all there, but we lost it. And we lost this, and we lost our spirituality. That is when there is dharma glani, yada yada dharmasya. Krishna assures, whenever there is a downfall, when there is a glani, some great avatar has to come to just raise society and put them back on track. And he said something nice which Nivedita has recorded. He said, whenever a spiritual person has come in India, it is followed by prosperity in the material world as well. Though that is not an ideal, but still, arts, culture, everything is revived. When Buddha came, he brought a wonderful spirit of renunciation. Buddhist monasteries were so famous. But along with that, the Buddhist art, the wonderful architecture that you see, which was developed just after Buddha passed away. These spiritual ideas bring about a revival in the other two fields. So also, he said, in the West, because they have already achieved superiority in science, arts, culture, they are now ready for spirituality. So that's why he says, the time has come, in that parlor talk in Pimlico, the time has come when nations have to exchange their ideals. Just as the Romans have exchanged their ideals with the Greek ideals and with the Indian ideals, just as we exchange commodities in the market. We think of when exchange is, by exchange we imply that it is only the commodities. I export something, I import something. So these are commodities, but there is an exchange of ideals also. And that is what Swami Vivekananda, that was his message, especially in the West. But he said for the East also there is a message. That is why he said Buddha had a message for the East, because he had a message for the East in the sense he tried to revive that spiritual ideal which was slowly vanishing. And his renunciation, especially renunciation, Buddhism can be called as the first religion which emphasized renunciation. Hinduism has renunciation, but Hinduism is a graded thing. There is some place for householder, there is a stratification of religion, but Buddhism is exclusively, and Christianity also, it's a religion for renunciates alone. The lower forms may be applicable to everybody, but if you see Buddha, that is why Swamiji says, I have a message for the West as Buddha had a message for the East. I mean the Eastern society. So Buddha came at a time when, again, when rituals were too much, sacrifices, animal sacrifices, many things. He came to the core of Vedantic religion and preached that this is true religion. So these prophets have to come, and she saw a likeness of Buddha, she says, that loftiness, that gentleness, which she saw in Swamiji. Normally it is, people think Swamiji was like a militant person, always trying to fight and all. But she saw he was a gentle person with full of lofty ideas. There was nothing trivial. He never spoke. In fact, one of the American disciples called him a sky pilot. So when she was asked, what do you mean by sky pilot? He said, a sky pilot is one who looks at the sky. I said, what do you mean by that? He said, you don't think of lower things at all. Your mind is always in a higher altitude. That is what she interpreted as sky pilot. So this was the type of personality which Swami Vivekananda had, and he came with this message of his master, gave it to those people, those in England, especially those who were ready to receive it, like Nivedita and many others. So Mother Savior and Captain Savior, who toured, who went on a tour with him to Switzerland, and when he just made a remark that I wish there is a monastery in the Himalayas, looking at the snow peaks in Switzerland, he said, if I had a whole hill for myself and I could preach these universal ideas, and disciples or maybe followers of Vedanta from both the East and the West, or followers of true religion, Advaita, can come there and exchange their ideals. So that was a dream project which they immediately planned. See, that's why he praised the British, because he says a British person, an English person, is slow to take ideas, but once he takes, he never gives it up. So he was very happy when Captain and Mrs. Savior, they just heard him once. They came to England, sold their house. It's a very big mansion in Finchley Road. It's a very big house. So they got a lot of money. They went to Mayavati, searched for a place. And even while Swami Vivekananda was alive, this lady, who is known as Mother of Mayavati, Mrs. Savior, because unfortunately when they reached there, he died. The husband died. So Swamiji came to console her, said, see, your project is okay, but your husband has died, you go back. How can a woman live here in the forest, which was infested with tigers? In those days, Mayavati was full of tigers, the man-eaters of Kumaon, the Corbett National Park. So they had purchased a house there and said, you are alone. Of course, there were other monastic disciples, brahmacharis there. But he thought the loss of her husband would make her weak. But it was quite the opposite. He said, I have come for a mission. And this lady stayed there for more than 30 years. Not only built the Mayavati Advaita Ashram, but built a hospital. Because in those hilly areas, if somebody fell sick, he had to die. And she knew because her husband died. There was no hospital nearby. So with the whatever little money she had, with whatever money she could collect, her own money, of course they had sold the house, she built the whole Mayavati Advaita Ashrama. Swami Vivekananda passed away, but she continued. She lived for 30 more years. So that is how the English work, which he did, maybe he stayed only for 290 days here and 3 visits. But the impact it has created by way of Nivedita, by way of the saviors who contributed, especially Mother Savior, who was Captain Saviour's wife and who practically established this ashrama in one of the most difficult places in those days. And just exactly as he had planned. That was her contribution to her guru. So these are the, though we historically, if we see Swami Vivekananda in England, if you ask what did he do, he was hardly here for 200 days. Maybe he didn't gather a huge crowd, though there were a lot of people who were interested, but it is difficult. You see, it's a creative minority which takes up religion. Most of them come for, take religion as a fad. And that is what Nivedita writes in the parlor meetings. Only she was the only one who was serious. Others came for different reasons. Some came as it was the fashion of those days. She writes that it was a fashion for wealthy people to come and attend these programs. So people came with different attitudes, but only a few, but that creative minority, that few people who really came for real religion, they were the one who did wonderful work, not only in India, this Mayavati and Sister Nivedita school and other education for women, but many of the other disciples, many of them were women who were not as empowered as they are today, but still they were the ones who took this ideal across nations. Josephine MacLeod, at the age of, till the age of 90, this lady was just working for spreading the ideas of Vivekananda wherever she could. Whatever little wealth, she was a wealthy woman, she was a Scottish, she inherited a lot of money. Then there was Sara Bull, whom Swamiji used to call as Dhira Mata. She was quite much older than Vivekananda, but she was the one who supported all the activities of this Vedanta. They just did not want this movement to collapse. And much later, much after Swami Vivekananda passed away, they held the torch, the flame that he had lighted, and took it all over America, Europe, and other places. So that is how his English work bore fruit, not directly. Obviously, our center was started much later. In 34, there was a Vedanta movement here to begin with, but it is only in 48 that an official center was started, which has now completed 75 years in different parts of London, England. So these are the consequences of the seeds that Swamiji planted more than 125 years ago during his 3 visits in 1895, 1896, which was more than few months, and finally a very short visit of 2 weeks in 1900 when he was going back to America on his 2nd visit. So this is his contribution. The work he did in England, specifically in England, that's why we have given that topic. So I'll conclude now. We are running short of time. So there won't be any scope for any questions today. We are already running. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.